Hi there, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jill Teep. I'm from the Northwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety, and you are joining us on a live webinar about degree programs at the University of Washington Northwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety. These are graduate degree programs specifically, and we're going to be discussing today where a degree in occupational health and safety can take you. So welcome to the informational webinar. A couple of housekeeping items for you. You are currently joining onto the webinar in listening mode. If you have a question for any of our presenters today, feel free to type it in the chat box. And if we have time, we will answer your question live. Otherwise, contact information for all of our presenters will be made available to you at the end of the webinar for follow-up as well. We are recording this session, so if you hear something you want to hear again later, don't worry, you'll have access to this material later, as well as something you can share with your colleagues or friends if they might be interested in a degree as well. And with that, we are joined today by two of our faculty members who are going to describe the program and some of the benefits of a degree like this and what the program looks like. We're also joined by one of our students as well to talk about the current student experience. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with Marissa Baker. Marissa.
Hi there. I'm just going to get my screen up here. Hold on. Hold on. There we go. All right. Hi, so my name is Marissa Baker. I'm an acting assistant professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences here at the University of Washington. I'm also the deputy director for the Northwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety. And so I wanted to just tell you what that was for just a few minutes, because this is a really cool funding and research mechanism that supports a large proportion of our graduate students. So NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and they are part of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, but they fund research and programs related to occupational safety and health. And one thing they fund are called ERCs, and those are Education and Research Centers. So the impetus behind this is that work-related injuries and illnesses have a significant public health impact. And part of NIOSH's mission is to train the next generation of occupational safety and health practitioners and research. So the purpose of the ERCs, one of which is right here at University of Washington, is to address the burden of occupational safety and health in the United States by providing interdisciplinary training for the next generation of occupational safety and health practitioners and researchers. So the ERC here at University of Washington funds graduate education, outreach related to occupational safety and health, and research. And when I say it funds graduate education, that's graduate students at both the master's level, both Masters of Science and Master of Public Health, and PhD level students, and that covers their tuition, their benefits, and a living stipend each month. So it's a pretty fantastic deal if you're interested in a career in occupational health and safety. There are 18 NIOSH ERCs around the country. You can see there we are number 18. And each one is kind of charged with serving a particular region. And so the goal of our center, the Northwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety, is to serve Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington with a research-based graduate education and continuing education for health and safety practitioners. So I'm briefly kind of going to show you all the different programs that our center supports and funds graduate students in. So we have 3 core academic programs. On the left there, the first is occupational hygiene, and Dr. Chris Simpson, who's the director of that program, will be speaking right after I'm done. We also fund occupational medicine residents and occupational health nursing. And then we have 3 other academic programs: Occupational Health Services Research, Construction Management, Occupational Safety and Health, and Occupational Health at the Animal-Human Interface. And these range from PhD programs to master's programs, but our students are funded in across all these programs. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk a little bit more in depth about the occupational hygiene program.
Thank you, Marissa. I'll just get my slide deck up. So welcome, everyone. As Marissa said, I direct the Exposure Sciences and Occupational Hygiene training programs within the ERC. So Exposure Sciences and Occupational Hygiene are degree specializations within the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health here at the University of Washington. So let's start with a little introduction. So what is exposure sciences? Exposure science can be defined as the study of human contact with the chemical, physical, or biological agents that occur in our environment. Occupational hygiene, which is sometimes called industrial hygiene, is a specialization within the field of exposure sciences that focuses specifically on exposures that occur in the workplace. So the cartoon on this slide attempts to illustrate the relationships between chemical, physical, or biological hazards, and those are represented as stresses in this cartoon. Human contact with those hazards, so humans are represented as receptors in the cartoon, and the downstream adverse health effects that occur as a consequence of those exposures. The diagram also indicates that additional factors, including genetics, personal behavior, socioeconomic status, and psychosocial stress, these additional factors can interact with the exposure to either confer susceptibility or resistance to the adverse health effects that are associated with a specific exposure. So through measurements and modeling, an exposure scientist or an industrial or occupational hygienist seeks to answer questions that might include: what are the quantitative relationships between the sources of the hazard and the human exposure that takes place? If I were to reduce a specific source, for example, by cleaning up a contaminated site in the environment or through introducing an engineering control in the workplace, is the human exposure and dose also reduced? What is the quantitative relationship between the contact and the internal dose? So for example, how much of a chemical that we come in contact with actually makes it inside of our body where it can exert adverse health effects? And in addition, what health effects do we see in association with a specific exposure agent or a specific exposure intensity? So our department offers 4 graduate degrees in the areas of exposure sciences and occupational hygiene. MS, or Master of Science degree in exposure sciences, typically takes 2 academic years to complete and requires a traditional research thesis. Most of the coursework for this degree is completed in the first year, and then during the second year, students focus on completing their research, then writing and defending their thesis. This particular degree provides flexibility for students to select their own focus area within the broad exposure sciences field, and they'll select elective classes in consultation with your academic advisor to provide didactic training in your chosen area of focus. Because this degree does not specialize in workplace exposures, students who enroll in the MS for exposure sciences are not eligible to receive funding from the ERC. So in contrast, our MS degree in occupational hygiene is the 2-year degree that focuses on workplace exposures. This degree includes 23 credits of required occupational hygiene-oriented coursework and a traditional research thesis. Although not required, we strongly encourage students enrolled in this degree to undertake an internship during summer following your first year in the program, so that you can get real-world experience in workplace health and safety issues. Students who enroll in this degree are eligible to receive funding from the ERC. Note that this funding is competitive and not all students will be awarded ERC support. Typically, when you are offered admission into one of our degrees, you'll also be told if you are being offered funding and the details and obligations associated with those funding packages. So our third degree is the MS in Applied Occupational Hygiene. And this is designed for students who have some prior experience of workplace health and safety issues and a clear career goal to be an occupational hygiene practitioner. The degree can be completed in 15 months, of which you only need to spend 9 months in residence at the University of Washington. The degree includes required coursework in workplace health and safety topics and a required internship in occupational hygiene practice. Instead of a traditional research thesis, students enrolled in this degree complete a shorter research project and create an electronic portfolio highlighting your experience and competencies in occupational hygiene. Students enrolled in this degree option are eligible to receive ERC support for their first year in the program. Finally, our PhD in Environmental and Occupational Hygiene provides students with advanced training in the field of exposure sciences. This degree typically takes about 5 years to complete, though that may be reduced if you are transferring into the PhD program from one of our MS degrees. Students enrolled in this degree take a common core of coursework, providing broad training in environmental and occupational health, in addition to elective coursework within your chosen area of specialization. Students enrolled in this degree whose research interests align with workplace health and safety issues are eligible to receive funding from the ERC. Admission into the PhD is highly competitive. We typically only enroll 2 to 4 new students into the PhD degree each year. Successful students would typically have a prior MS degree in a closely related field, prior research experience, and a very clear vision of what it is you want to accomplish during your doctoral training and how that training aligns with your career goals. So now I want to highlight some of the research that our students engage in. As I have mentioned, exposure science is a very broad field, and students with a wide variety of interests and skill sets can find rewarding career pathways within this field. Some of the topics that, upon which our graduate students have undertaken research are illustrated on this slide. For example, we've had a number of students working in the area of air pollution exposure and health. This research has included controlled exposure studies, developing novel exposure monitoring methods, development and implementation of low-cost environmental sensor networks, and communicating and mitigating risk, such as the risks from wildfire smoke exposure. Many of our students have been involved in agricultural health and safety research, including evaluating new technologies to minimize pesticide drift, as is illustrated in the current picture, developing new methods to assess worker exposure to pesticides, the sharing of microbiological hazards between workers and livestock, and studying heat stress and heat illness in outdoor workers. We have had a number of research projects involving the mining industry, illustrated as one of our graduate students in an underground workshop in an underground mine. And she was involved in studying exposures to diesel exhaust through both air sampling and biological monitoring. Other students have looked at mitigating health hazards in vehicle operators due to whole body vibration, and looked into best practices for implementing a safety culture in the workplace. And finally, I want to note that the University of Washington is ground zero for research in cannabis occupational health and safety, due to the fact that the state of Washington was amongst the first in the nation to legalize recreational use of cannabis, which has led to the development of a large new industry to grow and process cannabis products for the consumer market. Our students are studying respiratory health in cannabis workers, UV exposures to workers from grow lamps. There is also a lot of interest in learning how to measure for worker impairment due to cannabis use, and in developing policies that, on the one hand, respect a worker's right to use cannabis for recreational or medicinal purposes, whilst simultaneously ensuring that the worker is not impaired on the job, such that they might cause harm to themselves, their co-workers, or to their employer. As I mentioned, our graduate students are very successful in establishing fulfilling and well-paid careers with a wide variety of public, private, and non-profit sector employers once they graduate. Some examples are illustrated on the slide here. The Boeing Corporation is a very large employer in the Seattle area, and many of our students have graduated to enter into health and safety positions within the Boeing Corporation. Similarly, students have gone into academia and worked for federal and local government, as well as working for a variety of environmental and occupational health consultancies. So finally, I want to transition to the department's website so that I can show you where to find more information about our graduate degrees and how to apply for admission into one of the graduate degrees here at the University of Washington. So if I click on the department's URL, deohs.washington.edu, that brings up the home page for our department. And then if I hover over the tab for prospective students and move down to the graduate program tab and click on that, you will see that that brings up a listing of all of the graduate degrees that our department offers. Looking first of all, as an example, at the PhD degree in environmental and occupational hygiene, if I click on that tab, it's going to bring up this web page that starts with an introduction to what this particular PhD provides instruction in. It's in the top right-hand corner here. The next section gives examples of career paths of recent graduate students. You can read a profile from one of our current students to find out what student life is like at the University of Washington and the kind of work that this particular student is involved with. And then on the right-hand side of the page, there's hot links that provide information about other research projects that our current or recent graduate students have been involved in. And then right down at the bottom of the page, there's a hot link that you can click on that will download a list of the course requirements for this particular PhD degree. On the left-hand, the menu on the left-hand side again lists all of the different degree options that we offer. So if I go to the MS degree in exposure science or occupational hygiene, you'll see that the web page is laid out very similar to what I showed you for the PhD degree, and that it begins by providing background information on these MS degrees, provides a profile of one of our current students, links to research projects that have been undertaken by recent students in the program. And then at the bottom of the page, there are the 3 different MS degrees that I described, and at the bottom of each, a hot link that's going to download the degree requirements for each of those specific degrees. And finally, if we go back to the menu on the left and click on the How to Apply button, that's going to bring up this web page that provides you with a timeline indicating how our admissions process will proceed. Note that the deadline for getting a complete application in so that it can be fully reviewed is December the 3rd. And this little blue bullet on the right-hand side is the button that you click to actually begin the application process. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the the web screen and go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So if you had clicked on one of those links to download the list of degree requirements, this is an example of what that download would look like. This one is for the MS degree in occupational hygiene. And you can see that it's laid out listing the required courses that all of our graduate students have to take, providing broad background and aspects of environmental and occupational health. And then there's a degree option specific set of requirements, because this particular degree is focused on workplace health and safety issues. There's 23 required credits here that are focused specifically on occupational health and safety. And then there's either the research thesis or the portfolio for our MS in applied occupational hygiene. Okay, I'm going to leave this final slide up for a few moments so that you can make note of any of the URLs that might be of interest to you. This webinar is being recorded, and if you want to refer back to it in the future, you'll be able to find it at the URL listed here. On our Northwest Center website, we also have an informative video that you can watch that provides more information about the ERC and our graduate programs. If you want to get in touch with me specifically to get additional information on the degrees that I have described for you, my email is listed here, simpson1@uw.edu. And finally, the link to apply for admission to one of our graduate degrees. And note again that application deadline is December 3rd of this year. So with that, I'm going to hand the screen over to Jill for the next part of the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson, and thank you, Dr. Baker, as well. Now we're going to hear a bit more from Max, a current student in our department. Max, can you introduce yourself, tell us about the program that you're in, and a little bit about what you're working on?
Sure. Hi, my name is Max Mielinski. I'm a current PhD student in this department, and what I'm currently working on is a lot of research within exposure modeling and understanding of UV light within cannabis growing operations.
Very cool. And what degree program are you entering it, or are you working on now?
So right now, like I said, I'm in the PhD,
okay.
Environmental and Occupational Health PhD.
And which stage are you in it right now?
So I'm sort of in the middle. I finished data collection, and I am in the data analysis and starting to write up. But if I may, could I talk about how I sort of got to where I am?
We'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Quite an interesting story. So this field is a field that allows someone like me, who's a mechanical engineer as a background, to take their scientific and technical knowledge and apply it in a human focus. That really attracted to me, and that was certainly one of the reasons why I chose this field. The engineering environment around Seattle was what narrowed my location down to the University of Washington. And when I got here, I learned really, I think, first and foremost, how much I didn't know that was built upon throughout the ERC. And then I really fell in love with the field. I came in as a master's student, and then I eventually became a PhD because I fell in love with my current project. So just by coincidence, I ended up at the state government for an internship. It's a program called SHARP. And what they did was they exposed me to a lot of, exposed me to a lot of different industries. And one of the things that was happening around this time was that marijuana was, well, it had just recently been legalized. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of talk about building all of the regulation infrastructure around the industry. So just by coincidence, I was in the middle of all this, and I'm like, I get to leave a legacy at literally create or being part of the creation of the infrastructure around a whole new industry. So this was my master's, and at that time, I wasn't thinking about a PhD, but as time went on, that second year of my master's, I decided I really wanted to do this. So lo and behold, I applied, got in, and well, the next 2 years, really where the ERC and where the various skill sets came from, I learned specifically how to develop a study. As an engineer, I definitely had a very siloed focus towards one thing, and I realized that there's really this whole process on making sure you don't miss something, and by extension, making the best decision out of a lot. It's never there's one decision. It's you have to make the best decision of what you've got. Secondly is writing. This department has transformed my writing from, I'll steal some words from Marty Cohen. These look like a bunch of sentences that you just kind of came up with. Like they don't come together at all. And recently, last year, my paper was used as the example for the ERC on the website, and that was really flattering. But that was completely this department. So that's sort of what I've acquired in my skill set. And where I am today is I am really excited to be doing my current research. I'm definitely in the writing mode, which is thankfully something I can do now. And then I'm hoping for another, I don't know how long it'll take, but hopefully it'll be a steady process on the way. And yeah, continuing trying to get some publications out and trying to continue to have that technical focus on people. Really, that's the key to what I felt within this department.
And does that kind of speak to what you want to do in the future?
Absolutely, absolutely. I definitely would like to pursue a certified industrial hygienist. That's definitely living that realm of applying skills to the greater good.
Yeah, that's excellent. Very good.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to remind everybody who is on the call right now that you could anytime go ahead and use that chat box to type any questions you have for anybody on our call today. So feel free to jump in there as well. Let's see, we've got a couple of questions coming in. We have one around how does the exposure science program prepare you in terms of a career? Can you talk about how what that preparation piece looks like? Maybe Dr. Simpson, you could start with talking about how you're preparing for that the exposure science program can really prepare you for your career, and then maybe Max, how that is from your perspective as a student.
Absolutely.
Dr. Simpson?
Sure. So I think one of the real strong points about our MS degrees is that they include a lot of practice-based experience. So for the MS in Applied Occupational Hygiene and the MS in Occupational Hygiene students in those 2 degrees typically undertake an internship with industry during the summer of their first year. So they're getting out into the real world. They're getting hands-on experience applying the skills and the knowledge that they've learned in their courses and applying that in the context of the real world, and trying to figure out how that information can be adapted and applied in a practical setting. So that helps you develop a clear vision of what what real world workplaces look like, and how what your role in those in the real world as an occupational health practitioner is.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about this too, about that preparation piece and maybe the hands-on experience of your training so far.
So the biggest thing was focusing on how to focus the skill set that you have and to figure out what's relevant. You can follow an OSHA regulation or standard to do lead testing, asbestos testing, but when you're in uncertain or very complex environments, all of a sudden that cookie cutter recipe on how to do an environmental assessment really just no longer applies. And what this training has prepared me for was to identify when there's a lot of complexity within a problem, and by extension to break it down and be comprehensive in the making sure you identify everything within that environment, or at least everything relevant within that environment. I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and that hands-on element really gives you a chance to have to figure out those elements.
And you can't model the real world in a lab. At the end of the day, there's no way to create the experiences that I had in a classroom, because there's just too much. There's so many things you can go, everything from various drift from other areas to behavioral components that you would have completely never seen in a classroom setting, or something that's so obscure that you only see it once in a lifetime. That's really the key. It's the complexity that I've been able to at least begin to develop the skill set to identify and by extension characterize and control.
Great. Dr. Baker, could you tell us a little bit more about how long students who are awarded funding can expect funding, and maybe a little bit more about what it's like to live in Seattle and the kind of support someone could hope for with being accepted into the program and given one of the funding packages.
Hi, so funding does vary student to student, but typically decisions are made for a year at a time, 3 quarters really. So September through June, and then as Dr. Simpson mentioned, typically students are doing an internship over the summer, and those would be paid internships. So they then wouldn't need the ERC support. So it varies by program, but typically it's at least a year. Seattle is an expensive city, but as we know, and the stipend amount, again, that varies by program, it varies by PhD versus master's level, and it's not necessarily meant to be a replacement of an income for someone who is working, but it is meant to be enough such that a student won't need to take out a substantial amount of loans or any loans at all in order to go through the program. Tuition is covered in full, whether you're an in-state student or an out-of-state student. Benefits are covered, medical, dental, and vision, and it's really good medical insurance. Comparable, if not better than what staff and faculty have. So it's fantastic medical insurance. Mm-hmm. And then the stipend is, it'll help cover your rent, and your transportation is actually covered as a student. Everyone has a U-Pass, which is free. And so, you'll be able to take the bus or the light rail. But yeah, we do have other students who might take on some hourly work, either, in the university, but typically students do make it work. Max might have a more nuanced perspective on that.
So Max, supporting yourself in Seattle while being in school, can you talk about your experience and maybe how the ERC was able to help?
Sure. So thankfully, I've always been lucky to find, before my current living situation, which my girlfriend moved in with me, but that was after 4 years of living in Seattle. That obviously my current situation, the rent helps a lot because she has an actual job. But for the 4 years that wasn't the case, I managed to find places for under $650 a month. I never paid more than that in rent, which was very fortunate. And certainly that allowed me to live quite, I wouldn't say comfortably, but certainly not starving within the limits in Seattle. And I lived in Fremont and I lived in Montlake my entire time here. So
those are considered pretty fun neighborhoods. They're young people, like there's things to do.
Yeah, it was a really good time. And so from I certainly got lucky, but if you look for it, you'll find those reasonable places.
Sure.
And then I just want to comment on the opportunities of different social activities and various things within the University of Washington.
Sure.
The University of Washington is huge. It's one of the biggest college campuses, at least in one location. There's some, like Liberty College in Virginia, which is very, very close to my hometown. That would be like a distributed campus. UW has one of the largest concentrations of students in the United States. So there's a social group for everybody. And then you can find pretty much every activity you'd want. I mean, I'm a huge soccer player, intramurals, various things like that. We even have sailing if you want to learn how to sail. So there's a wide.
Go Sounders.
Yeah, Sounders too. Like, it's great. But I mean, like sailing on campus.
Yeah,
like
of course.
It's amazing.
Resources within the university.
Yeah, yeah. The various political groups as well. Just a lot of various like getting under or vulnerable populations to actually vote, kind of that activism type clubs within campus. So really, you can find anything here.
Great, that's great. There really is. I mean, this campus is kind of astounding, the vastness of it all.
Oh, yeah.
Marissa, is there any compensation available for professional training or conference opportunities that are provided at all?
There is, and I'm glad that that was asked. So one of the wonderful benefits of the ERC is that we have money that can be used by our trainees for travel. Lots of our trainees typically go to the American Industrial Hygiene Conference and Expo each year, which moves around the country. This year it's in Minnesota. Last year it was in Philadelphia. And so we can assist with airfare, lodging, conference registration, food. And then there are a lot of other regional conferences that we typically encourage our trainees to attend. The Cascadia Conference, which is a joint conference with University of British Columbia and Oregon State University. There's some local Northwest Occupational Health Conference, for example. But that list is in no way exhaustive. If a trainee comes in and says, hey, there's this really cool conference that's really related to what I'm studying, would be a great networking opportunity, there is travel support available for that.
That's fantastic. Dr. Simpson, can you talk a little bit about how a prospective student could learn about available research topics or faculty research topics that they may want to become interested in, or get to know some of the faculty? Where would they find those resources or those faculty members?
Sure. So for prospective students, the best first source of information is to go to our department webpage. And under the listing of faculty, each faculty has a page that lists the research activities that they are involved with. In addition, the degree program pages that I highlighted in my talk give examples of the research topics that our students have been involved with in recent years. And that's usually a good starting point for finding out the kind of research activities that go on within our department. Following on from that, you can reach out to individual faculty members or reach out to myself to find more specific information on exactly what research topics the faculty member may be working on currently or in the upcoming year when you plan to enter into the program. Typically, our students work on topics that faculty members already have either an interest in or research funds to support that kind of a research. However, sometimes students will come in with a very clear idea of a research topic that they want to propose, and then it's a question of making a connection with a faculty member or a couple of faculty members that have the specific expertise to be able to advise a student in that particular topic that they want to work on.
That's excellent. And if someone was interested in understanding a little bit more about how competitive or what kind of educational work experience you guys are looking for as part of that application process, can you speak to what you're looking for in someone who may be applying for one of the programs?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And so that varies by degree. For our 2-year MS degrees in either exposure sciences or occupational hygiene, we would be looking for students that had an undergraduate bachelor's degree in a scientific field. It wouldn't necessarily have to be environmental health or occupational hygiene specifically. But in addition to that scientific background, and it might be a biology degree or a chemistry degree or even an engineering degree, we'd want to see either some practice-based experience or at least some evidence in the personal statement that you write that you have an understanding of the field of exposure sciences or the field of occupational hygiene, and have a vision for where you see your career progressing within those particular fields. For students that are applying for the PhD degree, as I mentioned, that's very competitive because we only admit typically 2 to 4 students per year into that degree. And so successful applicants for that degree often, but not always, will have a prior master's degree in a related field. Typically, you would have either some research or some practice experience such that you're coming into the PhD degree with a very clear idea of what it is that you want to do, where you see yourself going with your career in the next 5 years or so, and exactly how it is that doctoral training is going to prepare you for your career objectives.
Thank you. And finally, we have one more question. Can you talk about connecting students with specific industries or community partners? Are there opportunities for students to kind of walk in with goals around those expectations, or can you talk about kind of maybe that matchmaking that looks like to connect people to some of those interests?
Sure. So within our department, we have one staff member who's responsible for managing our internship programs, and she helps to broker relationships between students and various industrial partners that are looking for to hire interns. We also have a faculty member who's our director of engagement, for want of a better word, and he also has personal connections with many employers, and can help to broker those relationships between the employer and the student that's looking for an internship with a specific industry, for example.
Yeah.
Within the ERC, we also have a continuing education and an outreach center. And oftentimes the people within that outreach program have connections with community partners. So for example, if you are interested in working with some specific underserved population or some particular community group or nonprofit or something like that, the continuing education folks and the outreach folks within our department typically will have those connections and be able to put a student in touch with those groups that might be looking for someone to do research with those particular populations.
Absolutely. Max, do you have any kind of thoughts on being able to design your own research projects? I mean, how do you feel like you've had any kind of control or input on that from your experience?
Yeah, so certainly my situation was quite lucky in the sense that I got in on that as the industry was founding, and there was a lot of unstudied unstudied just environments within the environment of the new industry.
Yeah.
So I had the option of a couple of different categories, from the respiratory health to the what I'm doing right now, the UV light. I chose UV light because I'd never really seen a study in UV light. I've seen a couple of very kind of focused on environmental or climate change based applications and solar, but not so many in the UV light specifically to indoor agriculture. It was just such a novel field, and I found it very cool. And certainly there was that technical background or aspect to doing a lot of the design work for the instruments, not so much design work, but yeah, just what was, I guess, design work for the instruments that we were using. And so yeah, I gravitated towards that UV light side for the really the unknown, and B, the vague familiarity I had with applied physics back from my mechanical engineering degree. So I took those all together and just found myself in a world of excitement. And when I got back to the university, my first meeting with my master's professor, I proposed to him like, hey, so I was doing this other thing, but then I did this over the summer. And within 5 minutes, he's like, this looks like my master's project. Let's just do this. And 5 minutes, this 3-year journey that we're on is really, that's how it started.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Jessica, you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm a current master's student in the Occupational Hygiene program, and I took a class with Chris Simpson, and some of my cohort members are actually doing their master's thesis work with him. And I'm actually working with Dr. Noah Satius, who's also part of our program. And my thesis work is related to psychosocial hazards among construction workers, and looking at biomarkers of stress between men and women in construction. And so that's kind of my focus. So a little bit different than some of the research topics that were covered. And then I also did an internship this past summer. I worked for a company called The Wine Group in California, which was really fun. And I got to do safety and environmental audits at some of our different vineyards and wine production sites. I had the chance to write up an electrical safety policy and develop some safety trainings, and then even had some chances to just develop standard operating procedures for just various things on site. So I had a really well-rounded experience, and I do feel like a lot of my coursework here, especially a course that we had to take that was a hazard identification course, where we actually went out into the field and got to see a wide variety of industries and actually get walked through their production facilities and had to identify hazards, control measures that were being implemented or weren't, and how we would help to mitigate some of the issues that we saw. So a lot of the coursework, and in addition to your research, I think definitely helped me to be able to secure an internship like that. And so I do think that overall, there are lots of really awesome research projects happening that are really novel, and you do get a really great base of coursework to help you not only in your future career, but also in terms of finding internships in the interim to even more so help you with your future career. So I really loved it here, and I love Seattle, and it's just, yeah, it's a great place to be. So
It's great.
yeah.
So we have some time for a Q&A, and so if we could have Dr. Simpson and Dr. Baker join us again. We have a few questions that we're going to pose to our speakers today. Maybe we could, Chris, and maybe Jessica, you could talk a little bit more about opportunities, about experiencing real life workplaces and some of those, the hands-onness of having a safety role in the workplace, kind of that experiential learning experience. What makes that special from our department, about that hands-on experience, and are those opportunities common for someone who would choose to do a degree here?
So maybe I can start with sort of the opportunities that we try and encourage students to take advantage of, and then I'll let Jessica talk about her perspective on the opportunities that she's had. So for all of our MS degrees, and even for our PhDs that focus on occupational health and safety issues, we absolutely encourage students to do an internship in a workplace, either working for industry as an intern, or if their interest is more on the compliance side, we can help to facilitate them getting a position with one of the state or local agencies that are involved in workplace compliance. And I think that's really important because it provides an opportunity for students to see how the theoretical material that we cover in coursework and so on actually gets applied in the workplace, and in particular to experience some of the social and the personal interactions that are an important part of being a workplace health and safety professional. In addition to those internships, many of our students will either collect data out in the workplace and use that data as the basis for their research project or for their thesis.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like I had lots of opportunities to apply what I've learned in class out in the real world, and just some of even our coursework in class kind of helped to illustrate that even though you do all this book work and it's supposed to work out this way, you get a chance to see that in real life. It doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes the best controls that you want to implement for an issue aren't feasible. So how can you systematically and critically think about what to implement, like when you're advising your future company that you work for, what they should implement, and that's feasible even for the company. A lot of times it's kind of having to learn how to critically think about those things. And I mean, there are even services here outside of coursework where we've, had to learn to use different IH instruments for measuring whatever agent you're interested in. There's also a group called the Field Group here that is always willing to, take you in to help you learn anything else that you might want to, that you maybe didn't get a chance to learn about in class. And so, yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities to get hands-on experience.
That's great. Another question, Seattle is a great city. It's an expanding city. Can you maybe, Marissa and maybe Jessica as well, talk about, is it easy to support yourself in Seattle as a full-time student and as a Northwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety trainee?
I can say something. So as I mentioned, the traineeship does cover tuition and benefits, and the benefits are good. It's medical, dental, vision, and you pay nothing for that out of your paycheck. And in addition to that, there is a living stipend. The stipend is meant to help offset the costs that come with being a student, so to help with rent, etc. I can't tell you how much that stipend is because it varies by year and by program. However, I can say that you are able to have other work on top of being an ERC trainee. So some of our students will, have a TA-ship or an RA-ship, which is like a research assistant-ship, whether it's hourly. And so there are other opportunities. And maybe Jessica can speak to this more, it does seem like the majority of our students do make it work and come out without loans.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely one of those things where when you take a step back and think about it, it's crazy to even think that there's a program where you're getting your grad school paid for, and it's not just your tuition, you're also getting all your benefits covered, and you're even, making money going to school. So, I mean, all of that already is just a huge benefit of the program. But I mean, I've definitely been able to make it work, especially if you have a roommate and stuff, and they provide, on your UW card, you can take public transportation for free using the link or the buses, and the buses literally go everywhere in the city. And then, I even did a reader grader position, which is like a paid hourly position just to make a little extra money for 1 quarter, but it's definitely feasible. Yeah.
And how long do students receive funding?
Well, so at least in my offer, I was given ERC funding for the first year, and then you usually work with professors depending on what track you're doing. So because I did the thesis track, I spoke with professors to ask about potentially doing TA-ships or research assistant-ships for covering funding for the second year.
Okay.
And usually it's kind of working with the faculty through those kinds of avenues to try to cover that second year.
Great.
And as Jessica suggested, the funding packages do differ by degree. So typically for our master's students, those that receive funding along with their offer of admission will be offered funding for the first 3 academic quarters in the program. Students that are doing a 2-year master's degree are eligible to receive funding in the second year, and certainly this year all of our continuing 2-year master's students are receiving funding in their second year. PhD students, we typically try and guarantee 2 years of funding as part of the offer of admission, because a PhD student is going to be in the program for a much longer period of time. And most of our PhD students are able to put together funding packages for the subsequent years in the program from the various mechanisms that Jessica referred to, such as teaching assistantships, research assistantships with their faculty advisors, and some of them even applying for their own fellowships and scholarships.
What stands out to you about the exposure science program preparing someone in terms of their career? Are there some like standout points about the program that are really, preparing you for that next step in your life?
So I definitely think that one of the strong points of most of our degrees is the link to real world issues and the opportunity for practice-based learning.
Mhm.
And for problem-based learning. So when our students graduate, they not only have a strong theoretical background in the topics that they need to know for their careers, but they have also had the opportunity to get a significant amount of hands-on practice-based training. And so they're that much more ready to hit the ground running when they hit the workplace.
Mhm.
The other advantage of the internship programs that I probably should have highlighted is that many employers use those as an opportunity to try students on for size and to determine if that student is a good fit for the company. And a lot of our students get offers of permanent employment as they come out of their internships.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that this program, another thing that I like about it is that because there are different disciplines within the umbrella of the ERC funded, it's nice that we get to do lots of interdisciplinary coursework and just even just getting to collaborate together outside of class time. And so I just applied for an applied research opportunity in the winter where it's looking at earthquakes and disaster preparedness and informing, Washington state policies. And so it's kind of cool that, you do get to kind of dip your toes in lots of different disciplines, even when you're focusing it on your main, your main track. So.
I help with a lot of outreach and continuing education within the community, and the once people are out of the programs, or people come to us often and talk about the quality of the instruction of the students that come out into the field after they graduate, and are often saying, like, who do you have ready for me? I need people. And those relationships that our department has with industry and with government and other entities is really special and deep. Those relationships go really, really deeply. And I think it creates a lot of opportunity across the board for students to interact, for those internships to happen, and for those job opportunities to come down the pike later in your career as well. So I think that's something that's special about the department. So one last question we have here is, how would someone learn more about research topics or faculty research interests as far as who they might work with in the future?
Well, if it's like pre-application or like as you're applying, what I did was I just went on faculty profiles and looked at their current and past research. And then while I was here, then we got to do lab rotations where we just got to kind of sit down and talk with each professor about what research is going on in the lab to see kind of how you might fit in or what you like, or just to generate research ideas. That was kind of my main avenues.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think looking at faculty profiles on the webpage, and then following up with specific faculty whose research interests of interest to you, to determine exactly what they're working on at the moment. That's especially important for the PhD students, because you're going to be doing research with an individual faculty member for a number of years. And so it's important to determine if that not only is the area of research good for you, but is that person going to be a good match in terms of their mentoring style and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for participating today. And I just wanted to leave up here the contact information for our speakers today, Dr. Marissa Baker and Dr. Chris Simpson. And thank you so much, Jessica Porter, for joining us today.
Hi, my name is Nilu, and I work primarily with Dr. Chris Simpson. And the majority of his research now is on cannabis. And so this could be UV exposure, particulate matter, volatile organic compound exposure, and their health effects. I particularly work with respiratory health effects of cannabis in workers. And these workers that I work with, they work in a growing facility in Washington State. And my study has two phases. The phase one, we decided to administer a questionnaire. And so by administering this questionnaire, we primarily wants to find out to how these workers' symptoms, health symptoms, respiratory, nasal, dermal, any symptoms that they have. And then based on the results of that questionnaire, we recruit workers that we think their symptoms are work-related. And then those workers, they go to phase two, and we do more health measurements like respiratory functions and lung inflammation and some skin tests to determine if they're allergic to cannabis. So overall, it's very hands-on. That's what I like about it, because I get to go to the facility, talk to the workers, and in the future, I'm going to do some health measurements. So it's pretty hands-on experience. For the as far as the ERC goes, that was it's great, because that's one of the reasons it really helped me facilitate the decision of studying occupational hygiene. And because it's just as you all know, taking a loan can be a little burdensome sometimes. And so it covers the tuition, as Marisa said, and the stipend can help with the rent that can be a little high in Seattle area. Yeah, so this was my summary. So if you have any question, I can answer those too.
Great, thank you, Nilu. I think, let me just switch back over. So I'm just gonna have this question screen up. If anybody would like to type in some questions in the box for any of the presenters. Meanwhile, I also have a couple of questions for you. So I guess, Nilu, if you could talk a little bit about how you connect with faculty to find specific research projects or internships. I know you said you work with Chris, or if you know how any of the other trainees in the department have gone about doing that to sort of align with your research interests.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it depends on if you're, if you can access, I don't know, the be in Seattle or not, for example. If you live in Seattle area, so you can definitely contact them and ask for, an appointment to meet them in person and talk about it. But if you're not, then what I would do is to go check the UW website. And all of the faculty in our department, they have their own link with their research interests and their publications. So you can look at those to see if there's anything that particularly interests you. And if yes, then their contact information should be there for you to email them and contact them and maybe discuss that further to see if they need graduate students in their lab or for their projects. I worked in Chris's lab as an undergrad because I did my undergrad in University of Washington as well. So that was how I knew about his research, but it could be, that a lot of our students, they are not even living here, or they were from other states, but they were able to connect to the faculty in our department and find the research of their interest. And if you mention what area of occupational hygiene or environmental health you're interested in, what happens in the interview process is that they try to have your interview, if it's possible, with those faculty that they have researched in those areas that you're interested in.
Great. And I think we just got a question, this one for Marissa. Are any of the programs online, or do you need to live/be in the Seattle area to take classes?
So the programs I discussed today are all in residence programs. However, the applied occupational hygiene program, really, you only need to be in residence for about 9 months, so 3 quarters. Your 4th quarter will be doing your internship off-site, and then your final quarter will mostly be doing research, writing it up into a thesis, so you don't actually have to be in residence. That's kind of our quickest option. The School of Public Health does have an online general Master's of Public Health, but the programs I talked about today and our funded programs are in residence programs.
Thanks. That was a really important question. So I wanted to know, Marissa, can you also talk about whether or not, so you said that the ERC covers tuition, stipend, and benefits for students. Is there also any compensation for any professional training or professional development?
That's a great question. So that's another benefit of being an ERC trainee, is that there's money available for things that aren't just tuition, benefits, and stipend. We provide funding for travel. Most of our occupational hygiene students go to the American Industrial Hygiene Conference and Exposition, which is all over the country. This year it's in Minneapolis. Last year it was in Philadelphia, and we provide funding for our students to go to that. There are also regional conferences that they typically go to. Cascadia Symposium, which is a joint conference with University of British Columbia and Oregon State. Some other local regional conferences like the Northwest Occupational Hygiene Conference, which will be in Bend, Oregon next year, and Nilu attended this year. And then in addition to that, there's funding available for kind of professional development courses if you identify them, and even research support if you're doing a project that needs a little bit extra money in order to get your research project going.
Great, and we have another question. What types of qualifications make a candidate more appealing to the application board? Great question.
So University of Washington uses holistic decisions when it comes to applications. So we're not necessarily hunting for the students who have the highest GRE scores or the best grades from undergrad. We're really looking for a diverse and well-rounded set of students. That being said, our strongest applicants typically are students who have a background in a STEM field, a science or engineering field, or at least have taken, chemistry and biology courses. Students who have done well in those courses and who have, done well on the GRE. I think that professional experience can be valued. So, but I would encourage anyone to apply because, like I said, it is a very holistic application process, and we're always trying to get the most diverse and most dynamic and exciting class that we can.
I guess kind of a follow-up to that for Nilu, can you talk a little bit about your background coming into the program and maybe what types of experience or skills you think helped prepare you for it?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I came to the program with a background in environmental health. So definitely it was helpful to, have a related major. But students in our programs, they come from all different kind of backgrounds. We have physics major, chemistry majors, that they have different background, but they still, come to the program and they can still, do the coursework. But as Marissa mentioned, have a background in chemistry, in my opinion, and biology. It's important for the program, and it just makes it easier to pass some of the courses.
Yeah, but there is certainly no requirement for any previous occupational health experience or coursework. We understand that not a lot of undergrad institutions offer those types of courses, so we're expecting you to come in possibly, new to the field. So kind of as Nilu said, like a scientific background is helpful, but if you're interested in occupational health, we're interested in you.
And I know we had one of the students who was on a previous webinar came from an engineering background and is currently pursuing a doctoral program and went through the master's as well. So I guess both Nilu and Marissa, you mentioned this, but if you could talk a little bit more about living in Seattle and kind of supporting yourself as a trainee and how that works.
I'll let Nilu answer this.
So the way the program works is that the first year, if you're accepted for the, get approved for the program, then the first year is funded fully, the tuition and the stipend. The stipend is enough to cover the rent in Seattle and a little more. And, I don't know, I personally worked last year a little bit, but not too much, maybe 12 to 15 hours. And with the stipend and my work, I didn't need to take a loan. But and the second year, depending of the availability of the ERC funding, you can also get maybe a quarter or two of funding. And there are lots of TA-ship and RA-ships available in the program too. That if for a quarter or two you didn't get funding, you can definitely apply for those. And I keep getting lots and lots of emails about different opportunities that to do TA-ship or RA-ship or different hourly work on campus. So yeah, I think did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess if you could each both touch on any opportunities to experience real workplaces, so the type of work that you can do in terms of experiential learning, sort of, I guess, both with your research, but then just any other opportunities through the ERC itself. Maybe for Marissa. So for trainees, do they have opportunities, I guess, just through the center itself for doing sort of hands-on work in the workforce?
Sure. So there are several opportunities. So as part of the center, we do set up workplace tours. Last year we toured Theo Chocolate, and if you're not local, that's an artisanal chocolate making factory here in Seattle. This year we are taking a tour of an Amazon fulfillment center, which will be pretty cool. And we've done tours of places like Hanford, which is a Superfund site in Eastern Washington where atomic bombs were developed, and of breweries or wineries. So things like that are the kinds of the experiences that we plan for our trainees, things that would be considered like a little more fun or trendy. But our trainees are also available to take Environmental Health 564, which is recognition of safety hazards in industry. And Nilu's nodding, so I suspect you took that class. Do you want to tell them a little bit more about that?
Yes, I took that class my first year, first quarter actually. So it's a really fun class. So we visited 5 different sites, and we went to a battery manufacturing place. We went to a foundry, steel mill. So it was really fun to see everything, just close. And also, we had to do like hazard identification before, and did some other reports after the class, after the field trip. So those, and also I wanted to mention the field group. I think Marissa probably knows better, but I participated in one of the field group last year, and we have this in our department, and all the students, if they are available and interested, they can participate in those. What happens is that our professors or some people in the field group that are industrial hygiene professionals, they usually could go to different sites, and they depending on the site, they measure particulate matters or lead or silica, and students get the opportunity to go and help out with those sampling. So that was another thing that was really helpful. Like last year, I went to a police academy, and they had also, when they train the officers, so they have a lot of shootings, and because of the lead in the bullets, they get accumulated, and they wanted us to go and measure lead in the facility. So I don't know if Marisa wants to add anything about the field group or not. But
yeah, just as Nilu said, our department is funded through part of the workers' compensation that is collected by Washington businesses. And so part of that money has been used to establish the Field Research and Consultation Group, which we just call the Field Group. And they basically act as a consulting service for small businesses with occupational health needs. So they go all over the state doing all different types of sampling. And their staff and faculty members in our department, and often they will ask students to come along so they can learn some of those practical skills and also see some cool workplaces like Nilu talked about. So that's an awesome opportunity for our students as well.
Great. Well, if anyone had any more questions, if they could type them into the chat. Oh, we've got how many students are accepted into each program, and I guess both for the program and then also for ERC funding specifically.
So as you can probably expect, this is going to be a very squishy answer because we don't necessarily have limits. It's like we want to accept as many qualified students as we can. So there's really been variability in the size of cohort. I mean, there have been years where there have been 10 students accepted, and years where there have been 5 accepted. And some of that might just have to do with the number of applications we got. So don't read into it too much in terms of, how many people are accepted. But it's pretty, our department probably has about 100 students across, 100 graduate students across a variety of programs. We also have a toxicology department and environmental health programs, which I didn't even talk about. We have about 25 ERC trainees any given year across the 6 programs. So like in the occupational hygiene program, there can be maybe between 4 and 7 funded trainees each year. So it really does vary, but the goal of the department is to, accept the most diverse and qualified class. And so I don't think there's any hard and fast maximums as to number of students they'll accept.